The fragmentation of Western European Christendom. Okay, remember Protestants, protesters. Well, what's going on at this time? Well, a bunch of different stuff going on. So people will credit Martin Luther and say he set all this off, but like a lot of these things, it's rarely one person that does it. It's kind of in the water, and then it sort of seems to gel around one person. So I'm going to liken this to, I think it's chemistry has a term called supersaturated, and it's it's a liquid is what it is, but when you drop that last piece into it, all of a sudden it turns into a solid. It's a different substance now. And so, something like that. I don't know if that analogy is entirely apt, but things are changing quickly right now. And Europe's not going to be the same on the other side of all of this. So the printing press, as I was talking about before, this is the internet of its day. Now all sorts of texts, including religious texts, are going into circulation. And so now people are starting to read more, in part because there's stuff to read. All right, so people are interested in it. Even these little pamphlets that come out. So they're not necessarily reading all the whole Bible at once, but they're getting snippets of it, and it's starting to really break apart the Catholic Church's monopoly over the Bible, essentially. All right, so Luther is a priest, right? He's trained in this tradition, but he says, my goodness, I don't like the idea of, sort of theologically speaking, works. We could be justified by faith alone. Paul talks about this a lot in section of the Bible, although Paul conflicts with them. So if you're interested in this, just present over it. People will go back to Paul, but they'll often pick and choose, like, well, I like this idea of Paul. And near as I can, just my personal opinion, Paul doesn't agree with Paul in the Bible. It sort of depends on how he felt when he was writing at the time. But one of the things that he says was, you're justified by faith alone. Other times he'll says, well, your works, you got to do works. And while we don't have a whole lot of distinction today, do know that, strictly speaking, so in the Catholic tradition, I think Methodists adopted this. There's a few other denominations, and the Protestants, you got to do good things, right? So Luther is saying, well, he doesn't really side with all of that, essentially. John Calvin's big religious thinker. He comes up with the idea of predestination and the elect, and even so Presbyterians, right, believe that doctrinally believe in predestination. But I will tell you, I don't think I know a single Presbyterian that gives a whole lot of stock to it. They don't sit around and go, God, we're predestined. It's like a lot of people right? The how associated is the congregation today to the actual formative causes for it? Sometimes not so much, right? But anyway, Calvinists, you get a kick out of this. We're expected this is the early Puritans is how you want to think. We're expected to dress simply, to study Bible regularly, and to refrain from activities such as dancing or playing cards. And I don't remember that this is a Calvinist thing, but with the Puritans in America, they didn't even celebrate Christmas. So I'm switching here a little bit away from Calvin to the Puritans. And then their kids, of course, were very different, almost a complete opposite from the actual Puritans in America, but nobody really talks about that aspect of it. Back over across the channel, the English Reformation. So this is what I want to get at. There are religious differences. So this is churning in the water in society. Society's not really getting along to the degree that it had before. And so somebody will take advantage of it. And so across the channel, in the case of England, King Henry VIII does not have a male heir. And it's really not just irking him, it's a problem because we don't think about it from Henry's perspective. Okay, Henry has to have a boy. He had one, but he didn't make it. I think he died at 10, 11, something like that. And as far as Henry's concerned, remember I don't remember if I covered it in this particular term, but Aristotle's idea of heat And so Aristotle's, this is going to tie into Henry, but bear with me for a second here. For a long time ago, Aristotle said, well, we know the difference between boys and girls. Or I'm going to speculate here. And I'm going to say that, and so this is not Davis saying this, Aristotle saying this. So if you have a lot of heat generated in the sexual act, get a boy. If you got to smoke a cigarette, at the end of the day, at the end of it, you get a boy. But if at the sexual act is, it'll work, right? Get a girl. Right? And so you can imagine where people ran with this, right? So you'd say, well, everybody knows that there are males that are more effeminate and females that are more masculine than other females. So it's like you could see how they tried on the scale, and if you'd have just kept trying, right, you'd have got a boy, or you'd have got a stronger boy, or whatever. You can also go too far on the spectrum and have a kid that's too hot, right? So in Hotspur in the Shakespearean history chronicles is a character, he can get manipulated. Because and so furthermore, you all know this because men are generally warm, women are generally cold, and old men, close to death, even they start getting cold, right? So heat. So we know that this is silly, and some people thought this was silly at the time. Don't get me wrong, but if you're King Henry VIII and you don't have a boy, you can't bring the heat, right? So if you can't even make a boy, then how can you defend the kingdom? This is what his opposition is going to be, the Yorks are going to be saying. So not just the Yorks, but that's his principal competition. He comes out of the Lancastrian family, and so they do not have a good blood claim to the throne. They took the kingdom, and they just said they did, as is all the case with anyone who gains power, right? It just had to be that God meant me to be in power. So Henry, what he does is he's blaming it on all his earlier wives. He said, well, it's not that I couldn't bring the heat, it's that their wombs couldn't hold it. That's what it is. It's not me. I'm the manliest man that's ever manned, right? And so he needed to divorce his most recent wife to try again and get a boy, because he's really worried. He's got to pass down his kingdom. If he doesn't have an heir, everybody starts getting worried that that the whole kingdom's going to implode, essentially. So he separates from the church to get his divorce, and so immediately anyway. That's the reason. And so there you go. So he kicks off what's going to end up becoming the Church of England. Witch hunts and religious wars. This is very unlike Europeans today, but at this time, Europeans had long believed that certain individuals possessed unusual powers to influence human affairs or discover secret information, such as the identity of a thief. To us, obviously silly on the one hand, but I've already given you the example that everybody like either you're like this and you don't want to admit it, or at least you know somebody like this, where it shows up in sports more, but it's not just sports. It can be all sorts of stuff. If I'm sitting in that chair and I got my Rangers hat on, man, the Rangers are going to win, right? So I'm influencing this idea that we can influence things. This is the root of sacrifice, going way, way back, not just in the Old Testament, all over the world. In fact, when the Bible was first spread, it wasn't in the colonial period after this. It was for cultures who had never come into contact with Christianity. By and large, they did not carry wit about Jesus. But they were really interested in Leviticus. Because in Leviticus, it gives you all these rules for going about things, how you can make it better, and so on. And so if you want if you're sorghum, or if you're rye, or whatever you're trying to do, if it doesn't grow one year, in Leviticus, you can go in and read the section where it says, well, what you want to do is you want to get an unblemished bird, unblemished dove, break its wing, and then you throw the blood east, right? And you go, oh my God, head slap. I've been going west for all no wonder my crop doesn't grow. right? But stuff like that is earlier in the Bible. And it's also they would take the Bible is a power object in itself and sort of pretend to read the Bible if they thought if the tribes it was getting spread to thought it would get a more power over other people, over their people, I guess, at the time. Okay, so this is what we really want to get to here. The 30 Years' War. This was a massive war. This was a nasty, nasty war that people do not like to talk about in Western civilization. And it's not even in a lot of books, which is, that in and of itself is extremely telling about how even historians and how we teach history in the United States, even though this is a European conflict, we don't really want to talk about some aspects of our history. And so these religious wars, think to start out, and then it's not just going to be that, these breakaway Lutherans, the people following Martin Luther, separating from the Catholic Church, and then they're arguing. The arguments start about things about like whether the transubstantiation, whether it's literally the blood and body of Christ. Do priests have powers to do the things that they can do? Is it this? Is it the? Why are you taking indulgences? On it's literal. It's symbolic. It's a pop, 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 and then they just start killing each other. And what happens is what always happens is what I was just talking about. Then other people jump into it. Then pretty soon you've got, and I forget the actual the steps this took here. So I think it was the Spanish king wanted to get in on it, but he had to go through France with his troops, and then the French king says, well, I'll remember your ancestral claims to this land in the northern part of Germany where it's getting really unstable for 10, 20% of the total take or whatever percent. He's going to extort something from him because the Spanish king wants something. Well, and then they can't agree after a while. And then these guys want in on it. And then it's just a free-for-all with people trying to take... And it's not... So it's a big civil war, but a true civil war is not like a civil war that we had in the United States where you have a line and there's a big... geographic separation, I guess is what I would say. Here it's all over the place. You never know. Sometimes the people in your town or the next town over are aligned with this other group, and it's impossible for society to get going. And by nasty parts of this, what I mean are this is an era where you're going to go take some horses. You're going to run through their fields so they can't eat in the future, follow back up, pollute their wells so they can't drink the water. You're going to exterminate them if possible, like starve them out. And so when these things get going, it's not just the actual battlefield stuff. It's all this other, the famine, the disease that's going to follow is going to take even more than the actual fighting. And so this is... On the other side of this conflict, as it got going, this 30 Years' War was so bad. This is what brought potatoes into prominence with the Germans, because as the Germans had to sort of increasingly leave the plateaus and go into retreat into the mountains, when they could come back and plant, I mean, it's hard to run potatoes down with horses, right? You can, again, you can't. It's a lot harder to burn them down, especially. Right, but you can also kind of grow them up the mountainside. And so whereas before the Germans wouldn't touch potatoes because where do they grow? In the ground, close to Satan, right? They're from this new world. This is a big plot, right? This is Satan's plot. They're from these heathens in the new world. They're bringing it over, just all the sort of foolishness you can imagine. But when you don't got nothing to eat, then potatoes sound pretty good after all this. Okay, so the 30 Years' War was the most destructive European conflict until the even more brutal world wars of the 20th century. And this is mainly because the technology increased. If they'd have had the technology, they would have unleashed nukes back if they had this technology at this time. This is hard to determine because it's hard to get the biological samples. But in some German territory, so where the center of this was, nearly a quarter of the population died from the war, and in some places, closer to half. Right? We've never seen anything like this. Right? In our times now, anyway. In this business about it's you don't have the separation between the battlefronts and the home fronts and who's on whose side and all that, and pretty soon people eating famine conditions, you start eating grass and weeds, dogs, cats, mice, whatever you can get is what you're going to eat. And we've seen this sort of all over the world. Like people, what do the biologists tell us? That we're all, if you really want to know how close you are to your animal nature is, let's go something like 72 hours, I think it is, without food, and see what you'll do at that point. Okay, so this is what I wanted to point out here. The 30 years and how I am going to couch this is a little differently than how some other people will couch it, but I'm going to say we do not have an enlightenment as about what we're about to get into until people are just sick and tired of fighting. And why are they sick and tired of fighting? Because of this 30 years war and the sort of the offshoots of it that we're going to talk about here in a second.